Hello and welcome back to another Rush Duel Links deck profile. Today we're finally taking a look at Dark Galaxy Fusion, which is very powerful if you draw the right cards at the right time. So first things first, we'll go over the skill Void Velge Fusion Draw. So it can be activated from turn 2 onwards if all of the monsters in your constructed deck are Galaxy type monsters. Send up to 2 cards, level 8 Dark Attribute monsters, Dark Hole Device, and or Fusion from your hand to the graveyard, then draw the same number of cards. If you sent Requiem to the grave by this effect, you can also send the top 3 cards of your deck, but only once per duel. So being able to send cards on top of your deck is actually really important because we do have a lot of cards that we want in the graveyard, and we need to get a large number of monsters in the graveyard to use some of our effects, such as Globule, which requires us to shuffle 3 dark monsters from our graveyard back into the deck, such as Prophet, which again, we want to shuffle 3 dark monsters from our graveyard back into our deck. We also want to get specific cards in the graveyard, so for example, Dark Hole Device being in the graveyard is very important, because if we have it in there, we can get it back to our hand using Apocalypse, which is really good, and getting Fusion in the graveyard is also good because we can get it back with Profit. So there's a lot of stuff we want in the graveyard, so the skill ends up working pretty well. Now, I've seen some people basically say that they want the Light Galaxy version of the skill, but the issue is this deck's ceiling is so much higher than the Light Galaxy deck that if we got the ability to just get a free +1 on top, this deck would probably be the best deck in the game by a mile. But let's go through the card by card so we can kind of go over what the deck does. So first things first, we're playing 2 copies of Requiem. So I didn't want to play 6 bosses, so we've gone with 5, and we have cut down on 1 Requiem rather than the Chrysaor. But Requiem is still really good. So by sending the top card of the deck to the graveyard, it gains a bunch of attack. Now, this can be really useful because getting up to big numbers can just in general be very helpful, right? 34 is still pretty good. If we can get up to that 4k, that's still decent. And we need to discard this with the skill in order to get the triple mill, so it's still a really good card, but I don't think we need it at 3 copies. And again, we don't really want to have 6 bosses. So having a large number of bosses in this deck shouldn't be the end of the world because the skill will theoretically unbrick us. But sometimes if you go first and you open 3 or 4 bosses, it feels really bad. So we've cut down on 1 just to try and prevent that from happening. And so far, these ratios have worked out really well for us. Next up, we're on Cataphract. So we need to have another face-up Dark Attribute Galaxy type monster for this to work, but it's still pretty good. So then top card of the deck to the graveyard. If we sent a monster to the graveyard, which should be most of the time, we can grab back a level 8 monster from our graveyard to our hand. So this is always going to be either the Requiem or the Chrysaor, and both of them are pretty good. This effect does come up a decent amount, especially because we can use the skill to get rid of all of our level 8s from our hand, then just go into Cataphract and use Cataphract to get one back to our hand as a free +1, which is really good. Then we have the Chrysaor, and Chrysaor is really strong. So 2500 attack is already fantastic, but if your opponent has 2 or more monsters, and this is something that I did forget a little bit towards the start, which is your opponent does have to have 2 monsters to use this effect, send the top 3 cards of your deck to the graveyard. If a Dark Attribute Galaxy type monster is among the cards sent, this turn, this card can attack up to the number of Dark Attribute Galaxy type monsters sent to the graveyard. If 3 Dark Attribute Galaxy type monsters with the same level were sent to the graveyard by this effect, you can destroy all face-up level 8 or lower monsters on the opponent's field. So that second part doesn't really matter. Most of the time, that's not going to be relevant. But this card quite often can attack 2 or 3 times per turn, which is unbelievably powerful. There have been a couple of games where we have won entirely off the back of just Chrysaor just attacking our opponent to death, and it is so good when that happens. Next up, Globule. Again, shuffling cards back in. We can use this as 2 tributes to get one of our bosses out, which is really good, especially if we're going for multiple Chrysaor, because then we can get upwards of like 6 or 7 attacks a turn, which is completely insane. But not only that, Globule is also used to summon out Void Velge Protostar, which is another fantastic fusion. So made using Globule and Prophet, which are 2 low-level monsters. 2400 attack is a little bit low, but 2800 defense is really good, and it is still level 9, which is fantastic considering it's made of 2 low-level monsters. We can add a level 4 or lower Galaxy-type monster from your graveyard to your hand. This will almost always be Prophet, because we can basically go into this, grab back Prophet, then use Prophet's effect to get back Fusion, and then if we have another Fusion material, we can go into another Fusion, which is really good. But the other effect is, if you have Dark Hole in your graveyard, or in this case it would be Dark Hole Device, we can also choose a level 8 monster in our graveyard and special summon it. Now, if we have the Chrysaor in the graveyard, that means we get Chrysaor to our field, we get Prophet to our hand, Prophet then gets us Fusion, we can then combine them both into Theogonia, and then Theogonia gets to revive back the Chrysaor, so really good combo. And I suppose this is a good time to talk about Theogonia. So made using Dark Prophet and Chrysaor, during your main phase that you special summon this card, special summon 1 level 8 Galaxy type monster from your graveyard face up to your field. So that's already pretty good, right? We can use this to get back the Chrysaor, or we can use it to get back Requiem, depending on which is better at the time. But then, the monster special summoned by this effect cannot be destroyed by card effects until the end of your opponent's next turn. Now this is very, very important because this means if your opponent is going to Dark Hole Device you, the monster you special summoned back can't be destroyed by Dark Hole Device, which is really, really important. That does come up quite a lot and can be the difference between winning and losing. One thing to remember about Theogonia is that its effect can only be used the turn it is special summoned, so after that it will just be a 3000 vanilla. Next up is Profit, and Profit is the most important card of the deck. Basically, if you don't find Profit, you're not really doing anything, right? All of your fusions, except for Gigantomachia, require Profit. So if you don't have Profit, you're not doing anything. If you have copies of Fusion in your hand, but you don't have access to Profit, they are a waste of space. You might as well send them to the graveyard with the skill and hope we draw into the Profit, which will just get us back the Fusion anyway. So Profit is extraordinarily important, and if you don't find it, realistically, you're not really having much of a game plan. Your game plan without Profit is basically Pricey or aggro and just kind of hope that's enough. But Profit, really, really, really important. I cannot stress this enough, how much this deck lives and dies off of Profit. Then we're playing 3 Meteor Lava. This card does come up, but out of every card in the deck, I would say this is the flex slot. You could swap this out for something else. But we can send cards from the top of our deck to the graveyard equal to the number of Dark Attribute Galaxy type monsters on your field. So you use this basically to try and dump specific things into the graveyard, such as Dark Hole Device, such as Fusion. Whenever we want to get something specific in there, we could also get an 8 in the graveyard and then bring it back with Cataphract, but Lava does facilitate that. So overall, really strong card. I have seen some people worried that having this many ways to mill is going to make you deck out, but between the Dark Profits and the Globules, I really do find it very difficult to actually deck out with this deck, so not too worried about that. And then the last monster in the deck is Pale Rider. This is just a 1600 beta, which on its own is quite nice, but this is also half of Apocalypse, and Apocalypse is an absolutely fantastic boss monster. The 2500 attack, 2000 defense, again made of 2 low-level monsters, which is great, level 9. Send 1 card from your hand to the graveyard. This turn, this card gains 1000 attack, okay, so 35, pretty good, and cannot be destroyed by card effects. So very, very important there. Means that you won't be able to be destroyed by your opponent's Widespread Ruin, but also he will survive your own Dark Hole Device. Then the other part of the effect, if you activated this effect during the main phase that you special summoned this card, you can add 1 Dark Hole from your graveyard to your hand, and notably Dark Hole Device is Dark Hole. And since this card can also be activated without using a cost, if we have a Dark Attribute Galaxy type Fusion monster on the field, we can just get out the Apocalypse, immediately grab back Dark Hole Device from the graveyard, immediately activate Dark Hole Device, Apocalypse will survive, and then we get another monster back from our graveyard, which is ridiculously good. So for our spells, we're on Pot of Greed as our Legend. The only other option I personally would maybe consider is Polymerization, and that would only be to get Gigantomachia out a little bit easier, but I don't even think Gigantomachia is that fantastic, so overall I do think Pot of Greed is just straight up better. Then we have 3 copies of Universal Storm, again very, very important because we do have things like Compulsory Evacuation Device and Execute You Riding floating about. Now, Compulsory Evacuation Device specifically is really bad news for this deck. This deck doesn't really have good ways to play around it and is very, very susceptible to it, but we can kind of play around Riding by going into Apocalypse. So if we can make an Apocalypse play with the Dark Hole Device, Riding isn't too bad, but Compulsory Evacuation Device, very, very annoying for us, so Universal Storm, extraordinarily important for that. Then we're on 2 copies of Dark Hole Device because we can only play 2. Absolutely ridiculous card. This card can just win you games pretty much on its own. The only issue is we won't always have access to Apocalypse, and we won't always have Device in the graveyard, but if we do, we're always feeling very, very confident. Then we're playing the 3 copies of Fusion because we can discard them for the skill. We also need to just find these cards. They're very integral from a Fusion deck working. And then finally, our Legend is Negate Attack. We've gone with Negate Attack because I think individually, this card is probably the most useful. Now, in some matchups, this card is going to feel really bad, right? Light Galaxy are going to pop this out of the way quite a lot of the time. Heroes, for example, could also just pop this with their monsters. But Negate Attack does feel really nice against specifically Dark Galaxy, and Dark Galaxy is the deck that can kind of just kill you out of nowhere, so I like having the extra insurance against that deck. Now, you could also say that Compulsory Evacuation Device is also really good into that, but for a similar reason, Negate Attack doesn't get popped that often when you're against Dark Galaxy, so it does feel really good to use. And being able to keep your whole board, as well as then just being a clapback on your opponent in a deck that is quite good at OTKing, is pretty good. I suppose the last card we haven't really talked about is Gigantomachia itself, made using 2 high-level monsters, Requiem and Chrysaor. Send 1 card from your hand to the graveyard, destroy a spell trap on the field, and then it gains 500 attack and can attack twice. Now, this effect is pretty good. The issue is summoning this card is quite difficult. Now, it's not too bad. There are ways to get to this. So for example, we just get out any of our bosses, so our Chrysaor or our Requiem, and we can go into Protostar, and then Protostar will just bring back the other one, and then we can go into the Gigantomachia. But overall, we haven't really felt like we've needed to go into this card in pretty much any of the games during our testing, so there is that. So overall, I would say this deck is really, really fun to play. It's also very, very strong. I think if we draw everything we need, if we find the Prophet, if we get the Fusion and the Darkhold device in the graveyard early, if we get plenty of monsters in the graveyard, if our mills with Chrysaor are really, really good, the deck feels unstoppable. This deck's ceiling is so, so high. It's so, so powerful when everything goes right. The downside is you do kind of have to hard draw or hard mill into a lot of these cards. We don't have a lot of like good search tools. And I think that's where this deck feels a little bit underwhelming. The other two brand new decks of the format, being Spellcaster Fusion and Light Galaxy Fusion, have skills that basically create cards or search your deck and get you everything you need to make all the plays that you have. Dark Galaxy doesn't get that luxury, you just kind of have to just hard draw into them. So because of that, by comparison, this deck feels a little bit inconsistent, but really, it's just those decks are very, very consistent, and this deck is like an average level of consistent that does make it feel, like we say, just a little bit underwhelming. But again, if you get just a little bit lucky, this deck feels insane. If you get just a little bit unlucky, sometimes this deck really feels like it's not really doing much. But like we say, even if we don't find the Prophet, we still can fall back on the Chrysaor/Requiem aggro plays. We still have access to Darkhold device, which can just be used naturally. We don't need to go into Apocalypse to use this, but it does make it a lot stronger. So the deck still does have other plays. Overall, I would say if you don't like bricking, if you like your decks to be as smooth and as consistent as possible, this deck might frustrate you. But if you're looking for a deck that has big comeback potential, big OTK potential, it feels really, really great when everything just goes just right, this deck is absolutely fantastic. And of those three decks that we've spoken about, this is performing the worst at the moment in tournaments, but it's still the third best deck in the game right now, like statistically, and this is still only the first week, so we could see this improve as we go forward. But let's fire into the replays so I could show you what I've been talking about